edit last week's lesson that I only talked 15 minutes. So you guys owe me, and we're going to take it out tonight. So I hope you brought your dinner. Get comfortable. No, it's when I first started preaching way back in the day, 15 minutes was about the number. So it's a good number. It's, say what you need to say and be quiet. We're going to be in Psalm chapter 7 tonight. Psalm chapter 7. Give you a quick recap in case you missed that 15 minutes of glory. David was in chapter 6 begging for mercy from God, and he gave him three particular reasons why he thought that God should be merciful to him. He said, number one, humans cannot survive when God gets angry, so there's nothing that I can do that would give me enough energy, enough strength to survive your onslaught if you were angry with me. The second one was, sin has made me physically ill, so you should see the need in me because my tears flow all night long and I feel terrible and my bones are aching within me. And the third one was for the sake of God's own mercy. That's who you are, God. I recognize you as a God of mercy, so it's inside your character traits that you should be merciful to me. And then we went over and read from Psalm 103, and the basic argument there is, if I die, how can I praise you from the grave? You'll lose a worshiper if you let me die. So those were the things David thought were important for God to consider in taking care of him. But in chapter 7, he's going to be talking about how God should not consider the needs of his opponents. Those that are treating him poorly, he wants God to intervene and to act on his behalf. So we're going to be reading from Psalm chapter 7. We'll first look at verses 1 through 5. His argument here is that you need to protect me because I'm the innocent party. I didn't do anything. And they're treating me poorly for no reason, and you need to intervene on my behalf. Chapter 7, verse 1. Lord my God, I take refuge in you. Save and deliver me from all those who pursue me, or they will tear me apart like a lion, rip me to pieces with no one to rescue me. Lord my God, if I have done this, and there is guilt on my hands, if I have repaid my ally with evil, or without cause have robbed my foe, then let my enemy pursue and overtake me. Let me trample my life to the ground and make me sleep in the dust. So David says, just take a look. God, I'm righteous. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve the treatment that I'm receiving. Makes me think of the book of Job. Job spends about 30 chapters trying to convince his best buddies that he's really not a dirt and rotten, low-down sinner, that he's a righteous guy, and these things have happened to him out of the blue, and he didn't cause them. Eventually, he keeps asking for God to come and have an audience with him. Let me tell you who I am and what I need. And eventually God shows up, and that's the end of the book when God says, well, who are you to ask me for an explanation? But Job was a righteous guy. Several times in the book, he's described as a blameless and upright man. But he still had terrible problems. David says, God, you should protect me. You should go against my enemies on my behalf because I'm innocent. And then the second one follows, makes perfect sense. You should go against them because they're guilty. Beginning in verse 6. Arise, Lord, in your anger. Rise up against the rage of my enemies. Awake, my God, and decree justice. Let the assembled peoples gather around you while you sit enthroned over them on high. Let the Lord judge the people. Vindicate me, Lord, according to my righteousness, according to my integrity, O Most High. Bring to an end the violence of the wicked and make the righteous one secure. You, the righteous God, who probes the minds and the hearts. God, you deserve to sit on high in judgment. You're the one that knows right from wrong, and you can tell that I'm telling the truth and they're lying. You can tell that they're the ones that are to blame, and they're guilty and they deserve whatever they get. Now, go back to chapter 6 from last week. When David saw guilt in himself, what did he want for himself? He wanted mercy. When he sees guilt in his enemy, what does he want? He wants God to act, do something to save me because I'm innocent and they're guilty. And then beginning in verse 11, there's a picture of God's judgment and his righteousness. God is a righteous judge, a God who displays his wrath every day. If he does not relent, he will sharpen his sword. He will bend and string his bow. He has prepared his deadly weapons. He makes ready his flaming arrows. Whoever is pregnant with evil conceives trouble and gives birth to disillusionment. Whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit that they have made. The trouble they cause recoils on them. Their violence comes down on their own heads. So he says, God, you know what people are like. Allow them to fall into their own traps. You're a righteous judge. You know exactly what's right and what's wrong. And you see what they're trying to do. Turn it on them, God. Let your righteousness end up putting them in the hole that they dug trying to catch me. Now, this is a fairly benign letter from, or a fairly benign psalm from David asking for God to intervene. In just a minute, we'll read another one that he wrote that's a lot more specific. But look at verse 17. I will give thanks to the Lord because of his righteousness. I will sing the praises of the name of the Lord Most High. So next week, Lord willing, we're going to take a look at Psalm 8, which is one of the best praise psalms that David wrote. It's very well known. You'll recognize a lot of the lyrics from Psalm 8. But David says, I believe that I can praise you because you're going to do what I want you to do when it comes to my enemies. Right? So chapter 6, Lord, forgive me, be merciful to me. Chapter 7, God, act against my enemies. Don't be merciful to them. But go over to Psalm 109. Psalm 109. There's a particular kind of psalm, and there's not a lot of them, there's a few of them, that are known as imprecatory psalms. An imprecatory psalm is a psalm where not only do they call for the righteousness of God, not only do they call for God to act on their behalf, but they call for God to do so in a very severe way. And some of these are extremely specific. There are a lot of folks who don't like imprecatory psalms. They don't really like that they're in Scripture because they're not very nice. They are pretty much the opposite of what we try to call on each other to do as Christians. So we'll read a little bit of this, and then we'll let Jesus answer from the New Testament in a minute. But Psalm 109, beginning in verse 6. Appoint someone evil to oppose my enemy. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he's tried, let him be found guilty, and may his prayers condemn him. May his days be few. May another take his place of leadership. May his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined homes. May a creditor seize all that he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his labor. May no one extend kindness to him or take pity on his fatherless children. May his descendants be cut off, their names blotted out from the next generation. May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord. May the sin of his mother never be blotted out. May their sins always remain before the Lord, that he may blot out their name from the earth. For he never thought of doing a kindness, but hounded to death the poor and the needy and the brokenhearted. He loved to pronounce a curse. May the curse come back on him. He found no pleasure in blessing. May blessings be far from him. He wore cursing as his garment. It entered into his body like water, into his bones like oil. May it be like a cloak wrapped around him, like a belt tied forever around him. And may this be the Lord's payment to my accusers, to those who speak evil of me. That's pretty specific, isn't it? Covered all the bases? Not quite. We won't turn and read the other one, but there's another psalm where it says that they should take their babies and break them against the rocks. Right? So there's some pretty specific psalms calling for God's justice against the other guys, right? So chapter 6 God be merciful to me. Chapter 7, God, don't be merciful to my enemies. And then you get over here to Psalm 109, and there's some pretty specific things that are called for as punishment that the writer wants God to do against his enemies. But those are called imprecatory psalms. Look over at Matthew chapter 5. This is why that particular passage doesn't sit easily with us. Kind of keep in the back of your mind, he loved to curse other people. May those curses come back on him. He never gave a blessing. May no one ever give him a blessing. May it be far from him. Here's what Jesus says in Matthew 5, beginning in verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks from you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. One of the character traits of David was that he was a warrior. It was the very thing that kept him from being able to build the temple. He wanted to set aside a plot of land, and he bought the plot of land, and he wanted to build the temple, and God said, your hands can't do that. You've been too much a man of war for too long. Right? You're a guy who writes psalms about bashing babies' heads against the rocks. You're a man who writes psalms against no mercy. You're not the right guy. Now, Solomon wasn't a sinless individual. He had all kinds of problems, did all kinds of things that we wouldn't consider to be righteous things. But he was fresh, he was new, and he wasn't a man of war. He was a man who was able, in fact, to bring peace among a lot of nations surrounding them, mainly by marrying their daughters. It seems he did a lot of that, but he was able to bring peace. And the only really tremendous time of peace was during Solomon's reign. David had defeated most of the enemies round about. Solomon made pacts with all the ones that remained, and they had a time of peace. And he reigned all the way from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, the largest that the kingdom would ever be. But he built that temple. God saw Solomon as one who was able to do that, but not David. David was too harsh, too ingrained with battle to be able to do that. Jesus, on the other hand, our perfect sacrifice, comes and lives a life where, he did a few times show some righteous indignation. He turned over a few tables and drove out some money changers, but he was the Prince of Peace. He was the one who brought a new way of thinking to people. You got enemies? Well, love them. Pray for them. Want the best for them. And so David, at the beginning of the lineage of David, the first king in the Davidic line, was a very warfaring, hard-nosed, rough guy. The David descendant, Jesus, who is the last and always reigning King of Kings, was a man who gave himself as a sacrifice for all the sins that everyone else had committed against him. So it's an amazing contrast between the beginning and the end of the Davidic line. Any questions or thoughts about those things? Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Lord willing, we will talk about Psalm 8 next week. And if you get a chance, go read through it, and you will immediately have melodies going off in your head, because you know that psalm. It has been put to some of the most beautiful music in history. So we'll spend a little bit of time with that next week. But if we can help you by way of a public response tonight, we'd love to do that as we sing.